Some grief runs so deep a man stops believing in second chances. Elias Boone had lost everything that mattered, and for 8 years he lived alone in the Montana mountains, trusting only silence and solitude. Then one frozen morning in 1882, 7 desperate women showed up at his cabin door. They were mail-order brides with nowhere to go, begging for shelter. Elias looked at them and said 2 words, "Go away." 6 of them turned back down the mountain. But one young schoolteacher named Clara Weston refused to leave. She stood there in the snow and told him she'd work for her keep. What happened between that broken mountain man and that stubborn young woman would become a story nobody in Montana territory would ever forget. Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mountain had a way of keeping secrets. Up in the high country where the pines grew thick and the wind carried the smell of snow even in summer, Elias Boone had made his peace with silence. Or so he told himself each morning when he rose before dawn, pulled on his worn boots, and stepped out into a world that asked nothing of him. His cabin sat in a clearing 2 hours' hard climb above Prospect Ridge, tucked against a granite face that broke the worst of the winter winds. He'd built it himself 12 years ago, back when his hands had worked alongside Sarah's, when her laughter had filled these woods and their daughter. Emma's small voice had called him Papa, back when he'd believed the frontier could be conquered with enough sweat and prayer. The frontier had taught him different. Elias moved through his morning routine with the efficiency of long practice. Check the traps along the eastern ridge. Skin whatever game the night had provided. Haul water from the spring that never froze, even in the deepest cold. Split wood. Tend the 2 mules and the aging mare that had been Sarah's favorite. He spoke to the animals sometimes, low, gruff words that didn't count as conversation because they never answered back. He was 42 years old and felt 70. His beard had gone more grey than brown, and his hands bore the scars of 100 cuts and burns and frozen nights. He'd been a cavalry scout once, back before the war, tracking hostile parties through these same mountains. Later, he'd trapped beaver and hunted elk for the trading posts down in Helena. He knew every game trail within 50 miles, could read weather in the clouds and danger in the way birds fell silent. But he hadn't been able to read the signs that winter, 8 years ago. Hadn't seen the blizzard coming early, hadn't stocked enough wood, He stopped that line of thinking the way he always did, with physical work. There was fence to mend on the south pasture, where something, bear or cougar, had tested the rails. He gathered his tools and walked the perimeter of his small kingdom, this patch of mountain he'd claimed as surely as if he'd put a brand on it. The truth was, he'd stopped being part of the world below. Prospect Ridge might as well have been 1,000 miles away instead of just down the valley. He went to town twice a year for supplies he couldn't make or trap, salt, coffee, ammunition. He spoke to the store clerk in single syllables, paid in cash or pelts, and left before anyone could strike up conversation. The townspeople had long since stopped trying. To them, he was the hermit on the mountain, the man who'd lost his family and his mind in the same winter. Let him keep his grief, they said. Let him rot up there alone if that's what he wants. And he did want it. Or he'd convinced himself he did. The tin box sat on the highest shelf in the cabin, behind the lamp oil and the spare candles. Elias tried not to look at it, but some nights when the wind howled like a woman crying, he'd take it down and open the lid. Inside lay a tarnished gold wedding band, too small for his thick fingers now. Sarah's ring. He'd slipped it off her cold hand himself after the ground thawed enough to dig. He kept meaning to bury it with her, but he never did. It was the last piece of her he could hold. The eastern sky was brightening toward noon when he heard the first sounds, wagon wheels creaking, women's voices carrying thin through the trees. Elias froze, his axe mid-swing. Nobody came up this far. Nobody. He set down the axe and moved to the edge of the clearing, every old instinct coming alive. Through the pines, he caught glimpses of movement on the trail. A wagon listing to one side on a broken wheel. And people, women, by their voices and silhouettes. His first thought was to retreat into the cabin and wait them out. Let them fix their wagon or don't. Let them freeze. Not his concern, but they kept coming, struggling up the last steep pitch toward his clearing. Elias stepped out where they could see him, arms crossed, making sure they understood this land was claimed. The wagon lurched into view, pulled by a struggling team of horses that looked about done in. 7 women sat in the bed or walked alongside, their faces red with cold and exertion. They wore traveling clothes, good cloth but dirty from the trail. City women, he could tell at a glance. Eastern, the oldest, maybe 35, was driving. She pulled the team to a halt 20 yards from his cabin and stood, one hand shading her eyes. "Are you Elias Boone?" she called. He didn't answer. Just stood there, a wall of silence. "We were told you lived up here," she continued, her voice shaking with cold or fear or both. "We need help. We need—" "Turn around," Elias said. His voice came out rough from disuse, hard as the granite behind his cabin. "Ain't got nothing for you." A younger woman spoke up, dark-haired and desperate. "Please, sir. We've been on the trail for 3 days. We have no food left, and not my problem." "We'll pay," another woman offered, fumbling in her bag. "We have a little money." "Don't want your money." Elias took a step forward, and they all shrank back. "Good. Let them be afraid. Let them leave. This is private land. You're trespassing. Get your wagon turned and get gone." The older woman, the driver, tried again. "We're part of a church mission. We were sent west as mail-order brides, but when we arrived in Prospect Ridge—" "I know what you are," Elias cut her off. "Heard about it in town last time I was there. Your men are dead or gone or married already. That's your misfortune, not mine. Now move along before I make you move." He meant it. They could hear it in his voice. One by one, they climbed back into the wagon or took up positions beside it. The driver released the brake, clicked to the horses. The wagon began a slow, awkward turn on the narrow trail, but one woman didn't move. She stood beside a pine tree, maybe 21 or 22 years old, with light brown hair escaping from a bun, and clear grey eyes that met his without flinching. She wore a simple wool coat and carried a carpet bag that had seen better days. There was something in the way she held herself, straight-backed, chin up, that reminded him of a school teacher he'd known as a boy. "Miss Weston," the older woman called. "Clara, come on." The young woman, Clara, shook her head. "You go on, Margaret." "I'm staying." "What?" Margaret's voice rose in disbelief. "You can't—" "I can, and I am." Clara turned to face Elias fully. "You said you've got nothing for us. Fine. Then I'll work for my keep." Elias stared at her. "Of all the damn fool— I can cook, clean, mend, tend animals," Clara continued, her voice steady. "I can read and cipher. I'm strong enough for most labor. And I'm good company when I choose to be, though I suspect you won't care about that." "Get back in that wagon," Elias growled. "No." The simple refusal hung in the cold air between them. The other women watched from the wagon, frozen in shock. Even the horses seemed to hold their breath. "This ain't a negotiation, girl." "I agree," Clara said. "It's a fact. I'm staying, and you can either accept that or waste time trying to force me off your mountain. But I should tell you, I'm stubborn as a Missouri mule when I set my mind to something. My father used to say it was my greatest virtue and my worst fault." Elias felt something crack in his chest. Surprise, maybe, or anger. He couldn't remember the last time someone had defied him. Zara used to back when. No. He shut that down hard. "Your funeral," he said flatly, and turned his back on her. He walked to his cabin, climbed the 3 steps, and went inside. The door slammed behind him with a finality that should have ended the conversation. Through the window, he watched the wagon complete its turn and head back down the trail. Clara Weston stood in his clearing, carpetbag at her feet, looking at his cabin like she was measuring it for curtains. Damn fool woman was going to freeze to death, and he'd have her body on his conscience. Elias grabbed his rifle from above the door, checked the load, and sat in his chair. He'd wait her out. Come nightfall, when the temperature dropped and the wolves started singing, she'd change her mind. They always did. The mountain had a way of breaking the stubborn ones fastest. Outside, Clara picked up her carpetbag and started toward his woodpile. Clara had learned early in life that men like Elias Boone needed action, not words. Her father had been cut from similar cloth, silent, stubborn, convinced that feelings were weaknesses to be buried deep. She'd watched her mother chip away at that wall for 20 years, one small gesture at a time. So Clara didn't knock on the cabin door, didn't plead or argue. She simply set down her carpetbag, rolled up her sleeves, and went to work. The woodpile was a mess, logs scattered, bark everywhere, no organization to speak of. She began stacking it properly, largest pieces at the bottom, building a structure that would shed water and allow air to circulate. Her hands were already cold, but work would warm them. Work always did. Inside the cabin, Elias watched through the window, his jaw tight. What kind of fool woman started stacking wood in freezing temperatures? And why was she doing it right, like she actually knew what she was about? An hour passed, then two. The sun arced lower, and the temperature dropped with it. Clara finished the woodpile and moved to the sagging fence by the animal pen. She found his spare tools in the lean-to, hammer, nails, wire, and set about repairs without asking permission. Elias told himself he didn't care. Let her exhaust herself. Let her realize the mountain didn't care about determination or grit. It would chew her up and spit her out, same as it did everyone who didn't respect its power. But when she climbed onto his roof, his damned roof, to replace loose shingles, something in him snapped. He burst out of the cabin, rifle in hand. "Get down from there." Clara looked down at him, hammer in hand. "It's leaking. I can see water damage on the inside beam from here. That's my roof. My cabin. You got no right." "You're right," she said calmly. "I don't. But it's going to leak worse come next rain, and then you'll have rot in the beam, and then you'll have a hole, and then you'll have animals nesting in your walls. So I'm fixing it now." Elias opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "I said get down." "I will. When I'm done." She turned back to her work, and Elias stood there feeling foolish with a rifle pointed at a woman on a roof. He lowered the weapon, his face hot despite the cold. "You fall and break your neck, that's on you," he muttered, and stalked back inside. But he didn't sit down. He stood at the window, watching to make sure she didn't actually fall. Not that he cared, just didn't want a body to deal with. Clara worked until the last light faded from the sky. By then, she'd patched the roof, mended the fence, stacked the wood, and mucked out the animal shelter. She was shivering now, her fingers clumsy with cold, but she didn't approach the cabin. Instead, she gathered her carpetbag and settled into the lean-to with the animals, piling straw around herself for warmth. Elias saw this through the window and felt something uncomfortable twist in his gut. Guilt, maybe. Or the ghost of the man he used to be, the one who would never let a woman sleep in a barn while he had a roof and a fire. He tried to ignore it. Ate his supper, dried venison and stale bread, alone at his table. Cleaned his rifle. Banked the fire, but when he lay down on his bed, sleep wouldn't come. He kept seeing her out there in the cold, stubborn to the point of suicide. Sarah would have taken her in. Sarah would have already made a place by the fire. Heated water for washing, offered food and comfort, but Sarah was gone. And this woman wasn't his responsibility. He lasted until midnight before he cursed himself for a fool and got up. He pulled on his coat, grabbed a blanket, and went out to the lean-to. Clara was awake, huddled in the straw. Her eyes reflected the moonlight, watching him approach. "Cabin's open," Elias said gruffly. "Fire's still warm. You can sleep by the hearth." "Thank you," she said simply, and gathered her things. He led her inside, pointed to a spot near the fireplace. She spread her blanket there and sat, hands extended to the warmth. Elias added wood to the fire, then retreated to his corner, as far from her as the small space allowed. "There's water in the bucket," he said. "Bread in the tin." "Don't touch anything else." "I won't." Silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling fire. Elias lay rigid on his bed, acutely aware of her presence. It had been 8 years since another person slept under his roof. 8 years of solitude, and now this strange woman breathing softly by his fire. "Why?" he asked into the darkness. "Why what?" "Why stay?" "You don't know me. Could be I'm dangerous. Could be worse than whatever you left behind." Clara was quiet for a moment. "I have nowhere else to go." The other women, they have each other. They'll find work in town or marry eventually. But me, I'm different. I don't fit the way they do. How so? I'm educated. I taught school back in Boston. Men out here don't want a wife who's smarter than them, who has opinions, who reads books. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. And I don't want to marry someone I don't love just to have a roof. So when I saw your smoke, your cabin, your mountain, I thought maybe I could build something here. On my own terms, Elias grunted. This ain't the place for building anything. No. You built a cabin. In life, I built a prison, he said, and immediately regretted the honesty. But Clara didn't pry. She just said, then maybe we're both looking for a way out. Morning came cold and bright. Clara woke to find Elias already gone, but he'd left bread and dried meat on the table, more than he'd offered last night. She ate, washed her face with the icy water from the bucket, and began exploring the cabin properly. It was clear no woman had lived here in a long time. Maybe ever. The place was functional but joyless. No curtains, no decoration, no softness anywhere. Cooking pots hung clean but unused above the fireplace. Shelves held supplies but no mementos. It was a place for surviving, not living. She found the wooden spoon in a drawer, almost missed it among the knives and tools. It was beautiful, hand-carved from cherry wood, worn smooth by years of use. The handle bore a pattern of leaves and vines, intricate work that spoke of patience and love. This hadn't been made by Elias's rough hands. A woman had owned this, used it, treasured it. Clara lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of history in the smooth wood. She found flour, lard, a precious bit of sugar. She knew what to do. By the time Elias returned from his trapline, the smell of fresh biscuits filled the cabin. He stopped in the doorway, frozen, as if he'd walked into the wrong house. Clara stood at the hearth, using the wooden spoon to stir gravy in the pan. She tidied as she worked, swept the floor, straightened the bedding, brought in fresh water. The cabin looked alive again. Thought you might be hungry, she said, not turning around. Game's scarce this time of year, but you had flour, and I found wild onions by the spring. Put that down. His voice came out strangled. Clara turned, confused. Elias was staring at the spoon in her hand like she held a snake. Put it down. Now. She set it gently on the table, stepping back. I'm sorry. I didn't mean, don't touch that again. He crossed to the table, picked up the spoon with shaking hands. For a moment, Clara thought he might snap it in half. Instead, he cradled it against his chest, his eyes squeezed shut. That was my wife's, he said, voice barely a whisper. Only thing of hers I got left. Only thing that still smells like... He broke off, turning away, so Clara wouldn't see his face. But she heard it in his breathing, the ragged edge of grief so deep it had no bottom. Sarah, he said. Her name was Sarah. She carved that spoon from a tree we planted together. Said it would season with use, get better with time. A bitter laugh. Everything she touched got better. Everything I touch turns to dust. Clara stood very still, afraid any movement would shatter this moment of vulnerability. How long ago? 8 years. Her and our daughter, Emma. Winter came early. I was out on a hunt, thought I'd be back before the storms. But the pass closed and I couldn't. I tried, God knows I tried. His voice broke completely. He set the spoon down carefully, reverently, and walked out of the cabin. Clara watched him go, her heart aching. She understood now. This wasn't just a man who preferred solitude. This was a man drowning in guilt, convinced he didn't deserve comfort or companionship or joy. She looked at the spoon on the table, at the half-cooked meal, at the cabin that had briefly felt like a home. Then she made a decision she would stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go, though that was true, but because Elias Boone was a man worth saving, and someone needed to remind him of that, even if he fought her every step of the way. She found him an hour later, sitting on a boulder overlooking the valley. The wind whipped his hair, but he didn't seem to notice the cold. I'm sorry about the spoon, Clara said, sitting beside him. I should have asked. You didn't know. No, but I know now. She was quiet for a moment, then said, my parents died 2 years ago. Yellow fever. I was teaching in a girls' school in Boston when I got the telegram. By the time I arrived home, they were already buried. Elias glanced at her. That why you came west? Partly. The school let me go afterward, said I was too distracted, too sad. They were right. Everything in that city reminded me of them. Every street corner, every shop. I couldn't breathe there anymore, so you ran. Yes, Clara admitted. Same as you. Difference is, I'm ready to stop running. Question is, are you? Elias looked back at the valley, at the smoke rising from distant chimneys in Prospect Ridge. Been alone a long time, I know. Don't know if I remember how to be any other way. Then I'll remind you, Clara said. That's what I'm good at, teaching people things they've forgotten. For the first time since she'd arrived, Elias almost smiled. You're a stubborn woman, Clara Weston. So I've been told. She stood, brushed snow from her skirt. Now come eat. Those biscuits are getting cold, and I didn't work this hard just to feed them to the mules. Elias followed her back to the cabin, and when they sat down to eat, he didn't object when Clara used Sarah's wooden spoon to serve the gravy. It was a start. The letter arrived with the spring thaw, carried by a traveling preacher making his rounds through the mountain settlements. Elias had been checking the trapline when he heard the man's voice calling from the clearing, and by the time he got back, Clara was already offering the stranger coffee and bread. Brother Elias, the preacher said, though Elias had never been anyone's brother in the religious sense. Been a long time since anyone saw you in these parts. Prefer it that way, Elias replied, but he accepted the coffee Clara handed him. Old habits of hospitality died hard, even for hermits. The preacher, a weathered man named Josiah Peters, pulled several letters from his saddlebag. Got mail for folks up and down the territory. One here's addressed to Miss Clara Weston, care of Elias Boone's homestead. He raised an eyebrow. Didn't know you'd taken on company. I haven't, Elias said at the same time Clara said, I work for Mr. Boone. Peters handed Clara the letter, his eyes shrewd with curiosity. Letters from the Church Ladies' Aid Society in Prospect Ridge. Looks official. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Elias watched her face change as she read, surprise, then concern, then something that looked like guilt. What is it? He asked when the preacher had finally left, leaving them alone in the clearing. Clara handed him the letter. It was from Margaret Holloway, the woman who'd been driving the wagon that first day. The words were carefully formal, but the message was clear. The other 6 women from the failed mail order scheme were struggling. 2 had found work as laundresses, 1 as a cook. Margaret herself was teaching Sunday school for room and board. But 2 others were working in the Golden Nugget Saloon. Respectable work during the day, but the line between serving drinks and other services was thin and getting thinner. The last woman, a girl named Elizabeth, had left for California with a gambler, and no one had heard from her since. We managed after you stayed behind, Margaret wrote. But some nights I wonder if we made a mistake leaving you there, or if you made a mistake staying. The town talks, Clara. They say you're living in sin with the mountain man. I know it's not true, you're too good for that. But I worry about you, and I pray you're safe. The letter ended with an invitation. If you need shelter, if things aren't what you hoped, you can always come back. The church has a room for respectable women. You don't have to stay on that mountain. Elias read it twice, then handed it back to Clara. His face was carefully blank, the way it used to be before she'd learned to read his silences. She's worried about you, he said. I know. Town thinks you're living in sin. I know that too. Don't bother you? Clara folded the letter carefully. Should it? I know the truth. You know the truth. What does it matter what Prospect Ridge thinks? But it did matter, and they both knew it. Reputation was currency for a woman, especially an unmarried one in frontier territory. Once lost, it was nearly impossible to reclaim. The other women? Clara said quietly. Margaret says 2 of them are working at the Golden Nugget. I know what that is. Elias had seen plenty of saloon girls in his time. Some chose the work freely. Others had no choice at all. Not your responsibility, isn't it? I stayed here. I had shelter and safety while you worked for what you got. Elias cut her off. Same as they're doing. "World's not fair, Clara, never has been." But guilt had settled in Clara's eyes, and Elias recognized it. It was the same guilt he carried over Sarah and Emma, the survivor's burden of being alive while others suffered. That night, Clara barely touched her supper. She sat by the fire with Margaret's letter, reading it over and over. "You thinking of leaving?" Elias finally asked. "No, but I'm thinking we should help them." "How?" "Offer them shelter here. There's room if we build an addition to the cabin. And with spring coming, there'll be more work, garden to plant, animals to tend. We could use the help." Elias stared at her. "You want to bring them up here?" "All of them." "Not all, just the ones who need it. The ones who are struggling. This is my home, Clara, my mountain. I didn't ask for one woman, much less 6 more, I know. And I'm not asking you to take them in permanently, just until they find better situations. Just until—" "No." Elias stood abruptly. "I came up here to be alone. You change that, fine. But I'm not running a boarding house for desperate women, even if they're desperate because we turned them away." The accusation hung in the air between them. Elias felt his anger rise, but underneath it was something else, shame, because she was right. He'd sent those women away into the cold, and Clara had been the only one brave enough or foolish enough to stay. "That was your choice," he said. But the words rang hollow. "And this is yours," Clara replied. "You can choose to help, or you can choose to let them struggle. But don't pretend you don't have a choice." She went to her bedroll by the hearth, turning her back on him. Elias stood there, fists clenched, wrestling with feelings he'd tried to bury for 8 years. The next morning, he left before dawn without saying goodbye. He stayed out all day, checking traps that didn't need checking, hunting game they didn't need, avoiding the cabin and the woman who'd made him feel things he didn't want to feel. When he finally returned at dusk, Clara was outside, splitting wood. She'd taken off her coat despite the cold, working with fierce determination. She didn't look up when he approached. "How many?" he asked. Clara stopped, axe mid-swing. "What? How many women need help?" "Not all 6, you said." "So how many?" She set down the axe carefully. "Margaret thinks 3. The 2 at the Golden Nugget, and a girl named Sarah." She stopped, winced. "Sorry, a girl named Ruth, who's sleeping in the church storeroom. 3 more women. In his cabin. On his mountain." The thought made Elias's chest tight with panic, but he looked at Clara, at the hope dawning in her eyes, at the strength in her shoulders, at the way she'd brought his dead home back to life, and he found himself nodding. "We'll need more beds," he said, "and a bigger garden. Can't feed 5 people on what I'm bringing in now." Clara's face transformed with joy. She moved toward him like she might hug him, then caught herself. But her smile was worth more than any embrace. "Thank you," she said. "This means everything." "Don't thank me yet," Elias muttered. "We got a lot of work ahead, and no guarantee this won't be a disaster." But as they walked back to the cabin together, making plans for the addition and the supplies they'd need, Elias felt something shift inside him. He was stepping back into the world, accepting responsibility for others, building something beyond mere survival. It terrified him, but Clara walked beside him, her presence steady and sure, and for the first time in 8 years. Elias thought maybe he could do this. Maybe he could be more than the broken man on the mountain. Maybe he could be someone who helped instead of hid. That night, Clara wrote back to Margaret, "Tell the women they have a place here if they want it. No questions asked, no judgment. Just work and shelter and a chance to start over. We leave for town in 3 days to bring back supplies. We'll bring them back with us if they're willing." She showed the letter to Elias before sealing it. He read it, then nodded once, his version of approval. "You're sure about this?" Clara asked. Elias looked at the cabin, at the mountains, at the woman who'd refused to leave when he told her to go. "No," he admitted, "but I'm sure about you. And if you say this is right, then I'm willing to try." It wasn't a declaration of love, but coming from Elias Boone, it was close enough. Clara sealed the letter and set it aside for the preacher's next circuit. Then she did something she'd never done before. She reached out and took Elias's hand. He didn't pull away. They stood there in the firelight, fingers intertwined. and made a silent promise to face whatever came next together. The mountain was about to get a lot less lonely. The journey down to Prospect Ridge took most of a day. Elias and Clara loaded the wagon with furs and carved goods to trade. Elias's work from the winter, things he'd made more from habit than intention. The morning was crisp and clear, and as they descended the mountain trail, Elias grew quieter with each mile. "You haven't been to town in how long?" Clara asked. 6 months, maybe more. He kept his eyes on the trail, guiding the mules with practiced ease. "Don't care for it much, the town or the people. Both too many questions. Too much concern that ain't really concern, just curiosity dressed up nice." Clara understood. Small towns fed on gossip, the way fires fed on kindling. And Elias Boone, the hermit who'd lost his family and lost his mind, was prime material for speculation. As they approached the outskirts, she said, "Let me do the talking. I'll handle Margaret and the women. You just focus on the supplies." Elias nodded, grateful. They made their way down the main street, and Clara felt eyes on them from every window and doorway. She kept her head high, her hand visible on the wagon seat, clearly separated from Elias. Propriety maintained even in proximity. At the general store, the owner, a man named Porter, greeted Elias with wary politeness. "Boone, been a while. Need supplies," Elias said, handing over his list. "Can you fill this?" Porter scanned the paper, his eyebrows rising. "That's a lot of food for one man, even with company." He glanced at Clara meaningfully. "Private business," Elias said flatly. While Porter gathered the supplies, Clara excused herself to find Margaret. She found her at the church, sweeping the steps, looking thinner than Clara remembered. "Clara!" Margaret's face lit up, then clouded with concern. "Your letter, are you serious? Mr. Boone agreed to shelter us?" "He did. We're building an addition to the cabin. There's room for you and whoever needs it." Margaret set down her broom. "The talk in town, Clara. They say you're his—" "I know what they say. It's not true, and that's all that matters, is it?" Margaret lowered her voice. "I've known you 3 months, and in that time I've learned one thing about you. You're practical to a fault. So I have to ask, are you staying on that mountain because you have to, or because you want to?" Clara met her friend's eyes. "Both and neither. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go. I'm staying now because I choose to. Do you love him?" The question caught Clara off guard. Did she? Love was a complicated thing, built from gratitude and respect and the quiet comfort of shared evenings by the fire. It was watching someone carve wood with patient hands and teaching someone to read again after years of silence. It was grief recognized and honored rather than dismissed. "I don't know," Clara admitted, "but I care about what happens to him, and I think he cares about what happens to me. That's more than most marriages start with." Margaret studied her, then nodded slowly. "Then I'll come, and I'll bring Ruth and the others if they're willing." They found Ruth in the church storeroom, as Margaret had said, sleeping on a pile of burlap sacks. She was younger than Clara had expected, maybe 19, with dark circles under her eyes and a wary look that spoke of hard lessons learned. "A place on the mountain?" Ruth asked when Clara explained. "What's the catch?" "Work," Clara said honestly. "It's not easy living up there, but it's honest work, and you'll have shelter and food and safety. No one will bother you. No one will expect anything except your share of the labor. And the mountain man? Mr. Boone. He's gruff and he's grieving, but he's not cruel. He won't harm you." Ruth looked at Margaret, who nodded confirmation. "I've never been afraid of work," Ruth said quietly. "Just tired of men thinking I owe them more than labor." They found the other 2 women, Anne and Catherine, at the Golden Nugget. Anne was serving drinks in the main room, her dress cut lower than modesty allowed. Catherine was upstairs, and when she came down her eyes were hard and her smile harder. "Charity," Catherine said when Margaret explained. "That's what you're offering, no thanks. I've had enough charity to last me." "It's not charity," Clara said. "It's work in exchange for shelter. Same as what you're doing here, but safer, cleaner." "You don't know anything about what I do here," Catherine snapped. Then her facade cracked slightly. "Do you?" "No," Clara admitted. "But I know what it costs to do work that hurts your soul. And I'm offering you an alternative if you want it." Anne touched Catherine's arm. I want to go, Cat. I can't do this anymore. For a moment, Clara thought Catherine would refuse out of pure pride. Then she saw the older woman's shoulders sag, the weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. What time do we leave? Catherine asked. They gathered at the general store as the sun started its descent. 5 women now, Clara, Margaret, Ruth, Anne, and Catherine, loading into the wagon with the supplies. Elias had watched the proceedings silently, his face unreadable, as they prepared to leave. The marshal approached, a broad man named Garrett with eyes that missed nothing. Heard you're taking these ladies up to your place. Boone, he said. That's right. Town's going to talk. Let them. Garrett studied the group. You planning to start some kind of commune up there? 1 man and 5 women? Clara stepped forward before Elias could respond. We're establishing a cooperative homestead, Marshal. Several people working together to build a sustainable life. It's perfectly legal and perfectly moral. That your story? It's the truth, Clara said firmly. And unless you have legal grounds to stop us, we'll be leaving now. Garrett looked like he wanted to argue, but he had no grounds. He stepped back, tipping his hat. Safe travels, then. But mark my words, trouble finds situations like this. You'd best be prepared for it. As they pulled away from town, the wagon heavy with supplies and hope, and 5 women who had nowhere else to go, Elias said quietly to Clara, He's right, you know. This will bring trouble. I know, Clara said. But some things are worth the trouble. She felt Elias's hand brush against hers on the wagon seat. An accident or intention, she couldn't tell. But she didn't move away, and neither did he. Behind them, the women began to talk quietly among themselves, sharing stories and fears and tentative hopes. And ahead, the mountain rose against the darkening sky, no longer a place of exile, but of possibility. They traveled through the evening, making camp once before completing the journey the next morning. When they finally crested the last rise and the cabin came into view, Ruth gasped. It's beautiful, she said. I expected something rough, but this, wait until you see the sunrise, Clara said. That's when the mountain truly shows itself. As they unloaded the wagon, Elias pulling down supplies, while the women arranged themselves uncertainly in the clearing. Clara saw him pause and look at what they'd created, this unlikely household, this refuge for the unwanted. His eyes met hers across the wagon bed, and she saw fear there, yes, but also something else. Determination, maybe, or the first stirrings of purpose beyond survival. We'll make this work, she said, though she wasn't sure if she was reassuring him or herself. Elias nodded once. Then he picked up an armload of supplies and headed for the cabin, 5 women following in his wake, like ducklings after a particularly grumpy drake. Clara smiled despite her exhaustion. This was going to be interesting. The addition to the cabin took 3 weeks to build. Elias worked from dawn to dusk, with the women helping where they could, holding boards, passing tools, learning construction as they went. The structure slowly took shape, a long room with bunks against one wall, a stove for heat, windows facing east to catch the morning light. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, safe, and slowly the women began to believe in it. Margaret proved to have a gift for organization, creating work schedules and meal rotations. Ruth took to the animals like she'd been born to it, gentling the mules with patient hands, and discovered she could garden, coaxing early vegetables from the rocky soil. And Catherine, after a few days of sullen silence, revealed she could sew better than anyone Clara had ever seen, mending their worn clothes with tiny, perfect stitches. They were building something. A community, a family of the lost and the searching. Elias watched it happen with the wariness of a man who'd learned not to trust good things. But Clara noticed he no longer retreated to the woods when the women's voices grew loud with laughter. He'd linger at the edge of their circle, listening, almost smiling. One evening, a month after the women's arrival, Clara found him on the porch, smoking his pipe and watching the stars emerge. You did a good thing, she said, sitting beside him. Giving them shelter. You did a good thing, he corrected. I just provided the space. You provided more than that. You gave them hope that not all men are cruel. Elias was quiet for a moment. I've been meaning to tell you something, he said finally. About why I really came to this mountain. Why I stayed. Clara waited, sensing this was important. I told you I lost Sarah and Emma in a winter storm. That's true. What I didn't tell you is that I was cavalry when it happened. Had orders to scout ahead of a unit moving through hostile territory. But Sarah sent word that Emma was sick and I... He stopped, pulled on his pipe. I deserted, left my post to try to get home. Clara's breath caught, but she said nothing. Took me 2 weeks to fight through the blizzard, Elias continued. By the time I reached the cabin, they were gone. And by the time I thought about returning to my unit, I was already branded a deserter. Had a price on my head. Still do, technically. How much? $500. Dead or alive, though they'd prefer alive. Want to make an example. Clara absorbed this information carefully. Is that why you avoid town? Why you're so careful about being seen? Part of it. Most folks in Prospect Ridge don't know about the desertion. It happened far enough east that news travels slow. But military types pass through sometimes. Marshals, people who might recognize me from wanted posters. Have you seen a poster? Elias nodded slowly. Found one in town about 4 years back. Nailed to the post office wall. My face drawn from an old daguerreotype, my name, my crimes. Standing there in broad daylight, looking at my own wanted poster, that was a strange feeling. What did you do? Took it down, burned it. Figured one less poster in the world couldn't hurt. He looked at Clara. You understand what I'm telling you? You've been living with a wanted man. If the army ever found me, you'd be considered an accomplice. All these women would. Clara thought about this, about the implications and the danger. Then she said, why are you telling me now? Because I found this. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper worn from handling. It was a wanted poster, newer than the one he'd described, with his face rendered in sharp detail. Was in the general store the day we picked up the women, hidden under other notices, but I saw it. Someone's looking for me, Clara, and now I've made us all targets. She took the poster, studied the harsh lines of his face as an artist had imagined them. The reward had increased to $700. We should take this to the women, Clara said. They have a right to know. I planned to. Tomorrow. Wanted you to know first in case you... He stopped. In case you want to leave. I'd understand. You've got your whole life ahead of you and staying here could ruin it. Clara looked at him, really looked at him. At the grey in his beard and the lines around his eyes. At the strength in his hands and the gentleness he'd learned to show. At the man who'd been broken and was slowly, painfully learning to mend. I'm not leaving, she said. And I don't think the others will either. You can't know that. No, but I know them. They're survivors. And survivors recognize one of their own. The next morning, Elias gathered all 5 women in the main cabin. He stood before them, the wanted poster in his hands, and told them everything, his desertion, his reasons, his fear that staying meant danger for them all. When he finished, silence filled the cabin. Then Ruth stood. My father beat my mother for 15 years, she said quietly. When she finally left him, he tracked her down and killed her, shot her in the street in front of witnesses. The law called it a crime of passion and gave him 7 years. He served 3. She looked at Elias. You left your post to try to save your family. I don't see a crime there. I see a man who loved more than he feared. Anne spoke next. The man who brought me west as a mail-order bride. He had a wife already. 3 wives, actually, scattered across 2 territories. He collected the bride payments and disappeared. Left all of us stranded. She shook her head. The law didn't care about that. But you care that we have shelter. That matters more than any poster, Catherine was blunt. I've done things that would get me hanged if anyone knew. We all have. Far as I'm concerned, you're no different than the rest of us, just trying to survive a world that doesn't give a damn. Margaret, practical as always, asked, what's the real risk? How likely is it someone will find you here? Low, Elias admitted, but not 0. Military sends scouts through occasionally. And bounty hunters, they're persistent. Then we'll be careful, Margaret said. We'll watch the trails, keep an eye out for strangers. We're all good at being invisible when we need to be. Clara had stayed quiet through all of this, but now she spoke. Elias is offering us a choice. We can stay knowing the risk, or we can leave with his help. He'll give us supplies, money, whatever we need to start somewhere else. No judgment either way. The women looked at each other. Some silent conversation passed between them, the kind women have when they've survived together. "I'm staying," Ruth said. "Me too," Anne added. Catherine shrugged. "Hell, I've got nowhere better to be," Margaret nodded. "We stay together. We're stronger that way." Clara felt her throat tighten with emotion. She looked at Elias and saw his eyes shine with something she'd never seen there before, gratitude mixed with disbelief. "Thank you," he said, voice rough. "All of you. I won't let you down." "See that you don't," Catherine said, but there was warmth under the gruffness. That evening they burned the wanted poster in the fire. Watched the paper curl and blacken, Elias's face disappearing into ash and smoke. "That's that then," Margaret said. "We're outlaws now, all of us." "Outlaws building a home," Ruth corrected. "Sounds like a story worth telling someday." After the others had gone to bed, Clara and Elias sat by the dying fire. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something wrapped in cloth, Sarah's shawl. The one Clara had seen him pack away in the trunk. "I want you to have this," he said, offering it to her. Clara's hands trembled as she took it. The shawl was beautiful. Hand-woven wool, dyed deep blue, soft despite its age. "Elias, I can't. This was Sarah's." "I know. And she'd want someone to use it, not have it locked away like a relic." He met Clara's eyes. "I've been holding on to the past so tight I couldn't see the present. But you taught me different. You taught me that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting. It means carrying what matters and leaving behind what doesn't." Clara wrapped the shawl around her shoulders. It smelled faintly of cedar from the trunk, but as she pulled it close, it began to smell like her, like the cabin, the mountain, the life they were building. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he cupped her face in his calloused hand. "You saved my life, Clara Weston. Didn't even know you were doing it, but you did. We saved each other," she said, and then finally he kissed her. It was gentle and tentative, the kiss of a man who'd forgotten how to be tender and was remembering. Clara's hands came up to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart under her palms. When they pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," Elias said, the words rough but certain. "Don't know when it happened, don't know how, but I do. I love you too," Clara replied. "And I'm not afraid of what comes next. We'll face it together." Outside, the mountain wind sang through the pines, and inside the cabin, two broken people held each other, no longer alone, no longer just surviving. They were living again, and it felt like coming home. Spring gave way to early summer, and the homestead flourished. The garden produced more than they could eat, so Margaret organized preserving parties, canning vegetables, drying herbs, smoking meat. Ruth trained two of the mules to pull a plow, turning rocky soil into productive fields, and discovered a talent for cheese-making, and Catherine's sewing skills meant they all had sturdy clothes for the first time in months. But it was Clara and Elias who held everything together. They worked side by side, their partnership now openly acknowledged, and the other women teased them gently about the way they looked at each other when they thought no one was watching. "When's the wedding?" Catherine asked one morning, blunt as always. Elias had looked at Clara, colour rising in his weathered cheeks. "Haven't asked yet." "Well, get on with it then," Catherine said. "We could use a celebration around here." But before Elias could ask, trouble arrived on a hot July afternoon. Ruth saw them first, 3 riders coming up the trail, moving slow and careful, like men who knew they were entering unfamiliar territory. She ran to find Elias, who was repairing fence in the south pasture. "Riders," she gasped. 3 of them armed! Elias's face went hard. He dropped his tools and moved quickly back toward the cabin, Ruth following. Clara met them halfway, already holding his rifle. "I saw them from the window," she said. "They stopped at the tree line, like they're deciding whether to approach." "Everyone inside," Elias ordered. Now, the women obeyed without question, years of survival instinct kicking in. Elias positioned them away from the windows, then took up his own position by the door, rifle ready. "Who do you think they are?" Margaret asked. "Could be bounty hunters." Could be deserters themselves looking for shelter. Could be worse. Elias checked his ammunition. Clara, my cavalry rifle is in the trunk. Load it. Clara moved quickly, retrieving the weapon she'd never seen him use. It was heavier than his hunting rifle, military issue, perfectly maintained despite years of storage. As she loaded it, she noticed initials carved into the stock, EB and SB, intertwined. Elias and Sarah. The riders emerged from the trees, hands visible and empty of weapons, though Clara could see gun belts at their hips. The leader was a lean man with a marshal's badge catching the sunlight. That's Garrett, Margaret whispered. The marshal from Prospect Ridge, Elias cursed under his breath. Stay back, he told the women, and stepped out onto the porch, alone. Garrett reined in his horse 20 feet from the cabin. His two companions, deputies by their bearing, flanked him, hands near their weapons but not on them. Mr. Boone, Garrett called. We need to talk. You're on private land, Marshal. State your business or move along. My business is the law. Garrett pulled a paper from his coat, a wanted poster Clara could see even from the window. Got this 3 days ago. Federal courier brought it special delivery. Someone's been asking questions about you, Boone. Someone with authority and money. Elias's grip tightened on his rifle. I've broken no local laws. Maybe not. But desertion from the U.S. cavalry? That's federal. And I'm obligated to bring you in. You'd need an army to take me off this mountain. Garrett smiled, but there was no humor in it. I thought you might say that, which is why I'm giving you a choice. Come peacefully now, and I guarantee you'll get a fair trial. Fight me and you'll be shot trying to escape. Either way, my duty's done. Clara stepped out onto the porch before Elias could respond. What trial would that be, Marshal? The kind where a man is judged by his worst moment instead of his best years. Miss Weston, heard you were still up here. Garrett's eyes were hard. You should come back to town. Place like this, situation like this, it's not proper for a respectable woman. I'll worry about my respectability, Clara said. You worry about your conscience. My conscience is clear. I'm upholding the law. Are you? Clara descended the steps, standing beside Elias. Because the law should account for context. Elias left his post to try to save his dying family. He failed and they died. Hasn't he suffered enough? Not for me to decide. Garrett shifted in his saddle. Look, I don't want this any more than you do. Boone's been a good neighbor, far as I can tell. Minds his business, doesn't cause trouble. But my hands are tied. Whose hands ordered this? Elias asked. Who's pushing for my arrest? Garrett hesitated, then said, Colonel Preston Vance. Ring a bell? Elias's face went white. Vance? You know him? He was my commanding officer. The one whose orders I disobeyed when I deserted. Elias lowered his rifle slightly. He always was a vindictive son of a bitch. He's also a powerful man now. Connections in Washington. He's been tracking deserters for years, making examples of them. You're number 7 on his list. Garrett leaned forward. Come peacefully, Boone. Maybe with a good lawyer you can... No. Clara's voice was firm. There has to be another way. There isn't. Garrett's voice softened slightly. I'm sorry. I truly am. Before anyone could move, the other women emerged from the cabin. They spread out on the porch, forming a line between the marshals and Elias. 5 women, unarmed but determined. You'll have to go through us, Ruth said quietly. And me, Margaret added. Anne and Catherine nodded agreement. Even practical Margaret looked ready to fight. Garrett stared at them in disbelief. Ladies, step aside. This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us, Clara said. We're a family here. You take him. You destroy what we've built, what we've survived to build. One of the deputies muttered something to Garrett. The marshal shook his head, clearly conflicted. I can't arrest all of you, and I won't shoot women for standing on their own land. But Boone, give us time, Clara interrupted. 1 month. Let us prepare, get our affairs in order. Then Elias will come to town voluntarily. Clara, no. Elias started, but she cut him off with a look. 1 month, Marshal. You have my word as a woman raised to honor her promises. Elias will surrender peacefully if you give us that much. Garrett studied her face, searching for deception. Finally he nodded. 1 month. But if he runs, I'll hunt him to the ends of the earth. Understood. Understood. The marshals turned their horses and rode back down the trail, leaving a wake of dust and dread. As soon as they were out of sight, Elias rounded on Clara. "What the hell did you just do? I'm not surrendering to—" "We're not going to surrender," Clara said calmly. "We're going to fight. But we need time to prepare. Fight how? With what? 5 women and an old deserter against the U.S. Army?" "With the truth," Clara said. "And with help." Over the next week, Clara laid out her plan. They would gather evidence of Elias's good character, testimonies from townspeople, documentation of his service record before the desertion, proof of the circumstances that drove him to leave his post. Margaret would write to lawyer contacts from her teaching days. Ruth would gather signatures from Prospect Ridge residents willing to speak on Elias's behalf, and would document their homestead, showing the productive, peaceful life they'd built. Catherine, practical as ever, said, "And if all that fails, then we run," Clara said simply. "All of us together." "Where would we go?" Ruth asked. "Canada, California, Mexico, somewhere the army's reach doesn't extend." Clara looked at each woman in turn. "But that's last resort. First we try to win this legally." Elias listened to all of this with growing amazement. "You'd all run with me? Give up everything you've built?" "What we've built is each other," Margaret said. "The place doesn't matter if the people are gone." That night, after the others had gone to bed, Clara found Elias on the porch, his usual spot for thinking. She sat beside him, wrapped in Sarah's shawl against the night chill. "You shouldn't have promised them I'd surrender," Elias said, but there was no anger in his voice. "Just resignation. I promised you'd come to town." "I never said you'd stay." Clara took his hand. "We're going to fight this, Elias, and we're going to win." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen what you're capable of when you believe in something. You survived 8 years of grief that would have killed most men. You opened your home to strangers when every instinct told you to stay closed off. You taught me to be strong, and now I'm going to teach you to hope." Elias pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long time, watching stars wheel overhead, both thinking about the fight ahead. "If this goes bad," Elias said quietly, "if they take me anyway, they won't. But if they do, I need you to know something." He turned to face her. "These months with you, with all of you, they've been the best of my life, better than I deserved. You gave me back my humanity, Clara. No matter what happens, that's not something anyone can take away." Clara kissed him then, pouring all her fear and love and determination into it. When they broke apart, she said, "Then let's make sure you keep your humanity and your freedom. Starting tomorrow, we go to work." And they did. The next 4 weeks were a flurry of activity. Clara rode to Prospect Ridge 3 times, gathering testimonies and support. Margaret wrote letters to every legal contact she'd ever known. Ruth and Anne documented everything about the homestead, creating a record of the productive, peaceful life they'd built. Catherine, in a surprising turn, revealed she'd once worked as a clerk in a law office. She drafted a defense brief that was clear, compelling, and damning in its indictment of Colonel Vance's vendetta. On the 28th day, a rider arrived, not from Prospect Ridge, but from Helena, the territorial governor's office. The letter he carried changed everything. Clara read it aloud to the assembled household. To Elias Boone, regarding desertion charges from 1874, after review of evidence submitted on your behalf and consultation with military authorities, this office has determined that exceptional circumstances warrant reconsideration of your case. You are hereby summoned to appear before a clemency board in Helena on August 15th. Failure to appear will result in immediate reinstatement of arrest warrant. Silence fell over the cabin. "A clemency board," Margaret said slowly. That's a chance. "A real chance. It's a trap," Elias said. "Vance pulling strings to get me out in the open where his men can—" "It's hope," Clara interrupted. "It's everything we've been working for." Elias looked at the faces around him, these women who'd risked everything for a broken man they barely knew. And he saw something he hadn't seen in 8 years. He saw a future worth fighting for. The hours stretched like years. Clara kept her hand in Elias's, feeling the tension in his grip, the way his jaw clenched and unclenched as he wrestled with hope and dread. Margaret paced the hallway, her usual composure cracking under the weight of waiting. When the bailiff finally called them back, Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought everyone could hear it. They filed back into the hearing room, taking their seats as the board reassembled. Vance sat rigid in the front row, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Judge Harrison cleared his throat, papers arranged precisely before him. This board has carefully considered all evidence and testimony presented. Mr. Boone, please stand. Elias rose, swaying slightly. Clara wanted to stand with him, but forced herself to remain seated. This moment was his alone. The facts are not in dispute, Harrison continued. You did desert your post. You did disobey direct orders. Under military law, this constitutes a serious crime, however. He paused, and Clara felt her breath catch. This board recognizes that circumstances matter. That context informs judgment, and that the purpose of law is not merely punishment, but justice. Vance leaned forward, his hands gripping the rail in front of him. After reviewing your service record, the testimony of 37 citizens, and the evidence of your life these past years, this board finds that your desertion, while technically criminal, was motivated by circumstances that would test any man's loyalty, the choice between duty and family in a life-or-death situation. This is outrageous, Vance started, but Captain Mills cut him off with a sharp gesture. Let him finish, Colonel, Harrison continued. Furthermore, we find that you have already suffered punishment far exceeding what a court might impose. The loss of your family, 8 years of self-imposed exile, and the constant threat of arrest. The law may demand justice, but it need not demand vengeance. Clara's vision blurred with tears. She gripped the edge of the bench, afraid to hope. Therefore, by unanimous decision of this clemency board, your desertion charge is hereby dismissed with prejudice. All outstanding warrants are vacated. You are free to return to your life without fear of prosecution. The words hung in the air, impossible and real all at once. Elias stood frozen, as if moving might shatter the moment. This is a travesty. Vance was on his feet, his face purple with rage. You're rewarding desertion, setting a precedent that will— Colonel Vance, Judge Harrison's voice turned cold. This board's decision is final. However, I feel compelled to add something to the record. He shuffled through his papers, pulled out a document. We received a letter from a Sergeant James Cooper, who served in your unit during the time of Mr. Boone's desertion. In it, he states that you denied Mr. Boone's request for emergency leave despite being informed of his family's dire circumstances. He further states that you did so not for tactical reasons, but because you, quote, didn't believe personal matters should interfere with military duty, regardless of the stakes. Vance's face went from purple to white. Is this true, Colonel? Captain Mills asked. That's a distortion of— Is it true that Mr. Boone requested leave and you denied it? Vance's silence was answer enough. Harrison's expression hardened. Then this board finds that while Mr. Boone's desertion was wrong, you bear responsibility for creating the circumstances that led to it. Your pursuit of this case appears motivated not by justice, but by personal vendetta. This hearing is concluded. The gavel fell with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the room. Elias stood motionless for a heartbeat, then his knees buckled. Clara was there instantly, catching him, holding him up as he shook with emotion too big for words. It's over, she whispered. You're free. It's over. Elias pulled her close, his face buried in her hair, and she felt him crying, great, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep and long denied. Margaret joined them, her own eyes wet, and for a moment the three of them stood together in the aftermath of mercy granted. Vance stalked from the room without another word, his back rigid with fury and humiliation. Clara watched him go and felt not triumph but pity. He'd spent 11 years nursing a grudge, and it had brought him nothing but this public rebuke. Outside the territorial building, the afternoon sun was bright and clean. Elias stood on the steps, breathing deep, looking at the world with new eyes. I'm free, he said, testing the words. I'm actually free. You were always free, Clara said. Oh, you just didn't know it yet. He turned to her then, and Clara saw the man she'd first met on the mountain. but changed, softened, opened. The walls were gone. The prison was broken. "Marry me," Elias said. "Right now, today. I don't want to wait another minute to start our life together properly." Clara laughed through her tears. "Here in Helena? Anywhere, everywhere. I don't care where, as long as you say yes." "Yes," Clara said. "Yes, yes, yes," Margaret sniffled, then laughed. "Well, that's settled then. Let's find a preacher before you two cause a scene." They found one 3 blocks away, an elderly Methodist minister who agreed to perform a simple ceremony in his church's garden. Margaret stood as witness, and a passing stranger agreed to serve as the second. The vows were traditional, the setting improvised, but when Elias slid a simple gold band onto Clara's finger, purchased from a jeweler on the way to the church, it felt more sacred than any elaborate wedding could have been. "With this ring," Elias said, his voice steady and sure, "I promise to never stop fighting for us, to never stop choosing you, to never stop believing in second chances." Clara touched his face, traced the lines that grief and hardship had carved there. "With this ring, I promise to remind you every day that you're worth loving, that we're worth fighting for. That home isn't a place, it's wherever we're together." When the minister pronounced them married, Elias kissed her like she was air and he'd been drowning. And maybe he had been. Maybe they both had been. Until they found each other on a mountain where a broken man had said, "Go away," and a stubborn woman had refused to listen. "Let's go home," Clara said when they finally broke apart. "Yes," Elias agreed. "Let's go home." But this time home meant something different. Not a prison of grief, not a hiding place from the world. Home meant a cabin full of women who'd become family. Fields they'd planted together. A future they'd built from nothing but determination and hope. Home meant the place where the lost had found each other and decided to be found. 3 months after the hearing, the first snow of the season dusted the mountain peaks, turning the world clean and white. Clara stood on the expanded porch of their cabin. It had grown again, with proper rooms now instead of just the lean-to addition, and watched the valley below turn silver in the morning light. Behind her, the sounds of breakfast being prepared filled the air, Ruth humming as she set the table, Margaret directing Anne in biscuit-making, Catherine's sharp laugh at some private joke. The household had grown to 8 now. 2 more women had arrived seeking refuge. Word having spread about the mountain homestead where lost souls could find shelter and second chances. Elias emerged from the cabin, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He handed one to Clara and stood beside her, their shoulders touching in the easy intimacy of people who'd learned to lean on each other. "Beautiful morning," he said. "Every morning's beautiful now," Clara replied, and meant it. The changes in Elias over the past months were remarkable. He smiled more, laughed even. The tight lines around his eyes had softened, and though the grey in his beard remained, he no longer looked like a man haunted by ghosts. He looked like a man at peace with his past and hopeful about his future. The ring he wore now was new, forged by the town blacksmith from the metal of Sarah's wedding band, melted down and reformed. Elias had been the one to suggest it, understanding that moving forward didn't mean erasing the past, but rather carrying it in a new form. The band bore an inscription on the inside, words Clara had chosen, "From grief to grace." "Margaret got a letter from Elizabeth yesterday," Clara said. "She's in Sacramento, married to a banker. Says she's happy." "Good, everyone deserves happiness." Elias sipped his coffee. "Even foolish young women who run off with gamblers," Clara smiled. All 7 of the original mail-order brides had found their places now, scattered across the territory and beyond, but connected by shared history and the knowledge that they'd survived together when survival had seemed impossible. "The garden's nearly ready for winter," Elias continued. "Ruth thinks we'll have enough preserved food to last until spring, with extra to trade in town. We'll need it." Clara set down her coffee cup and took Elias's hand, placing it gently on her stomach. "We're going to need a lot more food come next summer." Elias froze, his eyes going wide. "Clara, are you—" "Yes." She watched emotions chase across his face, joy, fear, hope, and something that looked like redemption. I'm pregnant. About 2 months along, the doctor in Prospect Ridge thinks. For a moment she worried she'd broken him. He stood statue still, his hand pressed against her belly, as if feeling for something he couldn't yet detect. Then he gathered her into his arms, holding her so carefully she might have been made of glass. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Clara asked, though she could feel his answer in the way he trembled. "Terrified," he admitted. "But yes. God, yes. Happier than I have any right to be." They stood like that, wrapped in each other, until Ruth called them in for breakfast. The announcement was met with squeals and hugs, and Catherine's practical question, "Do we need to build another room?" "Eventually," Elias said, his arm around Clara's waist. "But we've got time. Time." It was something he'd had too much of and not enough of all at once. 8 years of empty time, stretching like a prison sentence. Then Clara had arrived, and time had become something precious again. Moments to be savored, days to be lived, a future to be built after breakfast. Elias and Clara took a walk to the clearing where they'd first met. The wagon ruts from that day were long gone, covered by grass and time. But the memory remained vivid. "I was so sure I wanted to be alone," Elias said, looking at the spot where he'd told 7 desperate women to go away. "Convinced that isolation was what I deserved. And now I know that isolation wasn't punishment. It was just another kind of death." He pulled Clara close. "You gave me my life back. You and all the others. You showed me that family isn't just blood. It's the people who choose to stand with you when standing alone would be easier." Clara leaned into him, breathing in the scent of pine and wood smoke and coffee that always clung to his clothes. "You gave me a home, a real one, not just shelter but belonging." They were quiet for a moment, watching an eagle circle overhead, riding the thermal currents with ancient grace. "Sarah would have liked you," Elias said softly. "She always believed in second chances, always saw the best in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. I wish I could have known her." "In a way, you do. She's in this place, in the cabin she helped build, in the way I learned to love because of her." He touched the ring on his finger. "And she's in this, transformed but not forgotten." That's how it should be, Clara understood. She carried her own ghosts, her parents, the life she'd left behind in Boston, the girl she'd been before the frontier had reshaped her. But ghosts didn't have to haunt. Sometimes they could guide. As they walked back toward the cabin, Elias said, "When the baby comes, if it's a girl—" "Emma," Clara said. "We'll name her Emma. And if it's a boy, William. After your father. Emma or William Boone." Clara tested the names. "I like how that sounds." "So do I." That evening after supper, the household gathered by the fire as they did most nights. Margaret was teaching Ruth to read better. Catherine was mending clothes with Anne's help. And Clara sat in the rocking chair Elias had made for her, his hand resting on her stomach, both of them feeling for the flutter of new life. This was what they'd built from nothing, a refuge, a family, a home. Not perfect. They still argued, still struggled with the harsh realities of mountain life, still carried scars from their various pasts. But they faced it together, and that made all the difference. Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, Elias held Clara close and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For refusing to leave. For being stubborn enough to stay when any sane person would have run. For loving me when I'd forgotten how to love myself." Clara kissed him softly. "Thank you for letting me stay. For teaching me that strength isn't the same as hardness. For showing me that broken things can be mended if you're patient enough." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other, while outside the first real snow of winter began to fall. It covered the mountain in white, pure and clean, like a fresh page waiting to be written on. And in the morning, they would write it together, a story of second chances and stubborn hope, of love found in the last place anyone expected, of 7 desperate women and 1 broken man who'd refused to give up on each other. The mountain had kept its secrets for so long, but now it held something better, a family, a future, and the promise that even the hardest hearts could thaw when they found the right warmth. Clara had stayed when Elias told her to go away, And in staying, she'd changed everything. Not just for him, but for all of them. It was enough. More than enough, it was home.